We got Rob Mohr joining right now.
Hey
Here he
Rob,
is.
how you doing?
What's
What's up,
going on?
gents? How are you guys doing?
We're doing great.
Doing great. It's great to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself before I do and do a silly one? We can do it more.
More clean cut
Yeah,
one.
definitely. So I'm not sure if you guys have given any introduction here, but I created the Huberman Lab podcast with Andrew. I now run the podcast along with the media company that Andrew and I created called Scicomm Media.
Hmm.
Um, the long and the short of it is, Andrew, as I'm sure many are familiar, neuroscientist at Stanford, natural born teacher, who has a real gift for explaining, how to better your physical health, mental health, and performance. So my job with Huberman Lab is basically to get out of his way and just make sure that he has the tools he needs, and I'm running the business to make sure that we're putting out really a high quality episode every Monday, and then also now on Thursdays with our Huberman Lab Essentials, which are our 30-minute episodes that go out on Thursdays.
Was there a key turning point in the business where it was taking off, or was it gradual?
Actually,
What?
start and
Sorry.
maybe go a little bit earlier than that.
Oh yeah.
I've
How'd
heard
you
it.
meet?
I've heard it, but like I'd love for the audience to like talk about the story of just like how it all kind of like started,
Yeah, let's
right?
start there. That's great.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So let me bring, I guess, best starting place in 2019. I met Andrew. We had lunch together because I was helping interesting people get booked on podcasts.
Hmm.
After about 10 minutes of talking to Andrew, it was clear to me that he was one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met on topics that were of interest to me. He, like whether it was how to manage stress, how to optimize sleep. He had studied David Goggins in his lab researching fear. He had done MDMA tests on mice, studying the like thermogenic effect of that compound on them. So basically, I was like, this guy knows more about things that are of interest to me, interest to my friends, and probably of interest to folks like Rogan, Tim Ferriss, and other podcasters. And my goal from then became, okay, how do I help in terms of brokering some of these introductions, and just selfishly wanting to hear him on some of these shows, chopping it up with folks like that. In 2020, when COVID broke out, Stanford basically, encouraged Andrew to get out and start talking to media. And that's when Andrew and I reconnected, just given the fact that his lab and a lot of his research was around fear, circadian biology, things that people were struggling with during the early days of COVID, being kind of like locked down indoors, a lot of stress going around. So it just kind of seemed like a natural fit to go on a lot of these podcasts. And after doing a bunch of them and getting just really positive response from audiences, Lex Friedman actually encouraged Andrew to start a podcast, and then Andrew and I talked about it. End of 2020, launched the show in 2021, and it was kind of off to the races from there.
Did you guys have instant product market fit? It's sort of historically extremely difficult to grow podcasts, right? Like people don't really realize they see you guys at the top of the charts. They just imagine you get a couple viral clips, all of a sudden you have a big show. It's very difficult to grow. I'm sure you guys had the benefit of like getting Andrew on these shows and maybe having those other podcasts promoted or whatever. But how quickly was it a rocket ship or maybe slow and steadier than people might think?
Yeah, it was definitely a bit of a rocket ship. I think, a lot of times people will look at the success of the show and kind of see it as this overnight success in some ways. But I think what is important to remember is that at this point, Andrew had, 30 years of researching biology and speaking to it from like a deep love in terms of understanding the mechanism of how these different systems in the body work and how to kind of optimize health based on those. And had, at least a decade of teaching experience, doing lectures and things of that nature. And then just kind of like putting the camera in front of him and his, ability to speak to these topics that are, rooted in science, but kind of coming at them from the angle of, how people can better their health in both the short term and long term through using them. I think is where the kind of like product market fit was, where, um, you know, uh, whether it be on YouTube or on RSS podcast platforms, people were interested in these topics, and Andrew could speak to them from a place of deep experience and understanding. And yeah, just kind of thinking it through in terms of what topics are going to be of interest to folks, but really just kind of kind of following the path of where his interest lied as well was key.
Give yourself some credit too, because you had a decade, basically, managing, various brands and whatever. How do you guys think of just sort of like distraction and avoiding distraction and focus? You guys spent a very long time just doing the show, sort of simple. You've branched out more recently, but it still feels very focused. And then at the same time, I'm sure if you guys said yes to all the great opportunities in front of you, you would never even be able to be in the studio. So how do you think about what's been your framework for deciding what to do, when to do it, when to say no, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say our default answer is no. Basically, we look at it through the lens of uh, everything if we look at it through the lens of our goal is to put out the best possible episode every Monday morning. Um, Everything that is competing for our time against that is really needs to be fantastic for it to make sense in terms of us pursuing. Andrew wants to spend all of his time prepping for either guest interviews or solo episodes on the podcast. So, you know, basically, we see everything as competing with that. So, our goal is always to weigh opportunities to not, just foolishly pass things up, but really to think about it from the context of this is pulling us away from what our main goal is, which is those Monday morning episodes. And if we have the bandwidth to take on something that's not going to interfere with that, and maybe even will be additive to that, then fantastic. Otherwise, it's a no. And I think you hear a lot about this from folks like Steve Jobs and other leaders, where it's the challenge is not saying no to things that are easy to say no to. It's saying no to things that seem like fantastic opportunities and ultimately are going to pull away from what our bread and butter is, which is just creating that best episode every Monday morning.
Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of the product with the introduction of the Essentials show and then distribution and how you think about repurposing the content and everything that happens downstream from that one really canonical piece of, Monday show?
Yeah, this is something I think a lot about, and it's something that our team is very focused on. We view it as like we put out these, 3 hour plus episodes, and then all the way down to a tweet that Andrew does, and it's like, how do we fill in the various kind of like subsequent like time domain elements that span that spectrum? So it's like everything from full length episode to essentials episode, which is 30 minutes, to clips on YouTube or X or wherever we're kind of putting those out on social media, to newsletter, and basically all the way down again to a tweet. And the goal is always to get the information out to as many people as possible and help people, regardless of how much time they have to allocate towards consuming the information, get the information. So, there's obviously the like monetization strategy that kind of spans across those too, because at the end of the day, we are a business. But the real goal is like, okay, how do we just get this information out there to as many people as possible? And the essentials episodes were a genesis of that, where we're looking at our content saying, so a lot of people just do not have time for a 3 hour episode. We were hearing from a lot of folks, this is actually pretty funny, that they'd love an episode, but they were like, if I'm sharing this with someone and it's a 3 hour episode, it's almost like I'm giving them like a to do or like an obligation. Where we
We
were
do
hearing,
that every
especially
day.
from like a lot of CEOs or business leaders, they're like, listen, I loved this episode, but I'm not going to share this with my friend because it's basically like, hey, I'm going to suck 3 hours of your time away or basically be requesting this of you. So the essentials episodes were kind of like birthed out of that concept of like, how do we make our content more shareable? How do we make it more digestible for those who have limited time?
What do you think the future of RSS is, the actual underlying technology? As we've gotten, we're a new show, but working with Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all this stuff, it's just genuinely hilarious and feels wrong how little it seems like Apple cares about just podcasting, despite it being such an important medium. Do you think it all kind of like shifts more towards streaming, or what's your take broadly on RSS? Is it sort of the cable technology, and maybe there's a future, or are we stuck with it forever?
Oh man, I have so many thoughts on this, especially the Apple piece. It's funny because like I got into podcasts in the very, very early days where it was like you download on iTunes and you kick it over to an iPod to listen to it.
Hmm.
And I just became obsessed with podcasts. Again, this is like probably 2010 timeframe.
Hmm.
Um, and obviously at that point it was like Apple was the only player. And then, they launched their podcast app. And slowly over time, other players have entered into the space, and Apple's kind of just like been caught flat-footed, maybe. I think probably some of it has to do with the fact that it was a part of their business that was, never earning money. So if you start with a zero revenue stream, then anything is a benefit. Whereas a company like Spotify or YouTube, they are very focused on P&L and looking to do things to dominate the space. To get to your question directly, though, it's interesting. Like, I think this is how you guys view your show and how we view our show. Even calling it a podcast is weird because it's been, a podcast is just the medium through which it's being presented to an audience. And we see ourselves as, content creators, and we're always going to put ourselves on the platforms that make the most sense. Whether that be, RSS feed and people are getting it there, and I do think that, there are a lot of people just who listen to podcasts while they're, doing various activities and whatnot, and are just listening to them. That having been said, I think there's a huge percentage of most shows now that offer video where, I would say half of our audience is either watching our content on YouTube or on X. And another half is listening. It's the benefit of the RSS feed is it's far more consistent. So we'll have episodes on YouTube that get like, 15 million views. But then we'll have other episodes that are kind of, in that 300 to 400,000 range.
Hmm.
Whereas on audio, it's a much tighter window. So it's like a kind of more consistent basis.
Hmm.
That having been said, RSS feed is set up in this weird kind of like it prioritizes recency over relevancy. So it's basically like, here's the most recent thing as opposed to serving it up in a meaningful way like YouTube does. YouTube is really good at understanding the algorithm and serving it up in terms of, what's most relevant as opposed to just what's most recent. Um, and I think RSS feeds need to figure that out. I think Spotify's working hard on that. But we haven't seen much movement from Apple on that front. I put a tweet out recently on the fact that I believe X is going to be a dominant player in the podcast space in the future, just by virtue of the fact that it's inherently social. Like, if you think about it, we'll put out an episode on Spotify and on Apple and on YouTube, and we, in large part, are announcing it to our audience on X. And we do that as a means to, broadcast it. And then people, oftentimes, we also put our episodes on X, but oftentimes people are then leaving the platform of X to then, pay attention to the podcast elsewhere. And I think as X gets better and better at allowing users to easily, navigate content and watch full shows on their platform,
Yeah.
there's no reason why people should be then migrating off platform to pay attention to the content. So I think that that's a major thing that Spotify will have to contend with. I think that YouTube has a pretty dominant place in the market with just their monthly active users. I want to say it's like 2.5 billion or something was the most recent number on that. Whereas X and Spotify are kind of in the like 600 million range over the course of a month. So a lot of ground to make up, but I think it's a lot harder to build a social platform than it is to build a, content hosting platform. So like I think X would find an easier job of creating the ability for people to easily consume content on their platform as opposed to something like Spotify trying to build a social network as part of their app.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last question for now. Quick 30 seconds of advice on how you guys have handled AI impersonation. A lot of people have an incentive to generate an image of or video of Andrew saying, "I love this product. I take it every day. It's like it helps with my tea," and then it's just completely fake. Any words of advice for people that might be dealing with impersonation or just sort of fake AI content as well?
Yeah, I think being vocal about it. So like we've made sure that Andrew's been pretty vocal about it. We had this thing where it was the Jawzrsizer, which was a complete nightmare on our end. We, basically filed legal action against them numerous times. They kept like they'd basically like file bankruptcy and spin up another company and kind of like all this
Wow.
craziness. A lot of people to this day still believe that Andrew was like promoting this, plastic ball that you
Wow.
put in your mouth and chew on, where basically a large part of that was, AI generated or
Wow.
clipped from, out of context from a podcast.
Yep.
No affiliation with the company. So we've basically been vocal about like, listen, if it's not being put out on a Huberman Lab handle or it's not listed on our, hubermanlab.com/sponsors, it is not a company that we have
Hmm.
any association with. We
Hmm.
also very intentionally have very few sponsors. Most of them you're going to be familiar with. They're the sponsors that are, basically always featured in our episodes over the course of a month. And, we're highly, highly selective with who we allow to be a sponsor of the show. And, if you ever question it, just go to hubermanlab.com/sponsors. That's where the sponsors we work with are. And, if you're seeing Andrew say something ridiculous and it's being put out by, some bizarre company, then it's probably AI or it's probably just like, faked in some manner.
Believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. The
That's right.
famous words of wisdom. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
And
This
we
is really
got
fantastic.
last thing we got
Oh yeah,
Andrew himself in the chat
He's
on
in the
X.
chat.
He says Rob is the secret weapon behind Huberman Lab, and no one can steal him. He's a loyal bulldog,
Thank
and he's
you.
also super generous with knowledge to help others. And he's a great triathlete. We didn't get to cover
Oh yeah,
your
we'll have to have
athletic
you
career,
back.
but would love to have you on again. Anytime.
Yeah, this is
And
fantastic.
I'll see
There's
you.
so much more to talk about. I mean, we're
I know.
in the same business.
I'll see you
So.
back in Malibu. You're the man. Thanks for
Of
coming on,
course,
Rob.
man. Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. Andrew's the best. I'll talk to you guys soon.
We'll talk to
Later.
you soon. Bye.